So, as Heidi mentioned, the title of this paper today is On the Verge of Life and Death, Obstetric and Perinatal Anxiety in the Coptic Life of Aaron. So, let's begin. A little late. Thank you guys for being patient. In 2019, Scientific American published an article entitled, and slide, to prevent women dying in childbirth, first stop blaming them. The article goes on to relay the troubling state of maternal health care in the U.S. and the equally troubling trend of blaming women for their own deaths. By attempting to redress the treatment of women in our article, Monica R. McLemore, and highlighting how modern medicine in the U.S. has failed to address the needs of diverse groups of women, it struck me that McLemore participates in a much larger ongoing narrative concerning the anxiety surrounding women in childbirth. In fact, she frames her article with these words. Slide. The shameful secret is out. Although the number of women who die in childbirth globally has fallen in recent decades, the rates in the U.S. have gone up. Her words express an age-old fear that the perinatal period, or the period immediately prior, during, after birth, remains marked by uncertainty for women. Approximately 2,500 years ago, the same sentiment appears in Euripides' Medea. She decries, then men also say that we women live lives quietly away from danger at home. The men go off to war. And slide here. Wrong, one birth alone is worse than 3 times in the battlefield without a shield. Fear of death in the birthing bed has echoed through the hive. Indeed, the same fear present in McLemore's article and Euripides appears in the episode from the Coptic Life of Aaron under discussion today, in which a woman almost dies in childbirth. Set in Upper Egypt in the areas near Aswan and Philae, the life, though composed in the 6th century CE, preserves stories from the 4th and 5th, and as a result, it offers a snapshot of a Christian community on Egypt's southern frontier over time, with special attention to its problems and concerns. The story of the woman's difficult birthing experience fits well into this literary framework. In the episode, an unnamed woman cries out in fear when the child she is attempting to birth dies inside her. Immediately, the child leaves her body, but the story does not end here. The woman's parents and husband travel to Abba Aaron, the titular character, to ask for him to heal the boy. Ultimately, they are successful when they return home. Throughout this domestic crisis, the text emphasizes how the woman has been on the verge of death. She voices this concern. Slide. For had I not entreated the God of the holy man Abba Aaron, I too would have sunk into death.
It's not working. Sorry. All of a sudden stopped working.
Oh no. When the family.
Is that good? Is that where we're going?
Yes, that's the one. When the family travels to Aaron, they too acknowledge that she was so close to death. This emphasis on the mother's near death overshadows the entire tale. In fact, I would argue that by presenting the episode in terms of the laboring woman's near-death experience, the life underscores both the banality of women's suffering in childbirth, but also understands her death as a real potential outcome of the birthing bed. In doing so, the text echoes ancient medical thought and popular thought around the dangers of stillborn fetuses to their mothers, and advances a Christian imagining of the perinatal female body as one that inhabits a liminal position, living but potentially dead. New slide.
No.
Okay. First, I will begin with a detailed introduction into the narrative account, then turn to a brief discussion of the late antique literary accounts of traumatic childbirth, and then I'll turn to medical thought concerning the dangers of stillborn children, followed by a discussion of the liminality of the woman in the midst of childbirth, and then give a brief conclusion. So let's begin. The event is described as a domestic crisis, and it unfolds as follows. And here I'm giving you a bit more of a detailed account of what happens. Quote, When a woman from Philly was about to give birth, her child got stuck inside her and died. End quote. The woman then, fearing her death, remembers the miracles that God worked through the holy man Abba Aaron, and she cries out, saying, God of the holy Abba Aaron, may you listen to me in this hour of need. After her entreaty, the text explains, immediately she gave birth to the small, dead boy. Her parents, presumably present for the birth of the child, greatly mourn his death. Seeing her parents' overtures of grief, she confronts them, emphasizing her birth experience as follows. Why are you so heavy-hearted about the child? For had I not entreated the God of the holy man Abba Aaron, I too would have sunk into death. In response, her parents say nothing. Instead, they, along with the child's father, make haste to Abba Aaron's abode, seeking his aid. When they arrive, Aaron inquires why they have traveled to him, and they beseech him, saying, we have come to meet your holiness. Accept this small gift of money from us, and pray for the little boy that he may live for his mother's sake. For his mother invoked your name at the moment she was about to give birth. If not, they both would have died. Aaron listens and eventually informs them, now as for you, if you believe the gift of Christ, it will be given to you. Hearing his words, the family decides to return home, but not before the father gathers some soil from Aaron's threshold and puts it in his cloak. Once they arrive back at their homestead, they are greeted with a room full of neighbors, the woman and the stillborn child. The father, amidst all of these witnesses, proceeds to take the soil from his pocket and sprinkle it on the dead infant. And immediately the child moved his legs and opened his eyes. And so, we are back. It's moving.
Yeah, that was my mistake. So what slide should I move forward? No.
We are on slide 14.
Okay. Okay.
There.
Keep going.
Yep. Yep, right, that's where we are. And despite the happy ending of the episode, I remain fascinated with two elements of the text, namely, the way the woman is described as coming so close to death, and the way the same woman rebukes her parents for what she views as their overzealous mourning. It is one of the episode's greatest ironies that when the woman's family entreat Aaron, they explain, and then slide, accept this small gift of money from us and pray for the little boy that he may live for his mother's sake. When a few sentences before, the woman to whom they make reference has rebuked them while expressing no such sentiment. In fact, her words in the slide, why are you so heavy-hearted about the child? For had I not asked the God of the holy Abba Aaron, I too would have sunk into death, imply the opposite. Her words underscore a certain level of injustice. The woman seems to be worried that her family may mourn the child more than her, or at least her horrible experience. And perhaps she's equally horrified about what their grief may imply, that they wish she had died and the babe had lived. While we cannot know whether the text intends such a reading, it certainly remains a plausible one. It lurks in the daughter's accusation that she too would have died, if not for the intervention of Abba Aaron and his God. And then slide. And we're going to dramatic childbirth in ancient literature. So on the one hand, the healing of the mother and child follows standard elements of healing narratives in late ancient Christianity. The time period, as Andrew Clisslip has noted, corresponds with the development of a burgeoning monastic healthcare system in which lay people viewed monasteries as places of healings. In the late antique imagination, Christians associated holy men not only with physical medicine, but they also imagined they could effect healing through prayer, the laying of hands, making the sign of the cross, and the application of blessed substances like oil or water. Assuredly, not only did they have these models, but they also had biblical ones. Note, the biblification of a stillborn child also could be said to parallel biblical models of raising the dead, like Lazarus. And finally, the text emphasis on the son mirrors Roman Egyptian familial concern over male heirs and their importance for the maintenance and continuation of the family. As Cornelia Horn has argued the tales plays into a larger topos of fathers seeking aid for their children in the life and the societal significance and preference given to male offspring. In this slide, as she puts it, I have not yet discovered a comparable story in any ancient source that tells of a father's heart-wrenching pleas for the reanimation of a stillborn girl. On the other hand, the episode contains several elements that deviate from late ancient literature, not the least of which is the description of the woman's delivery in the first place. Greco-Roman literature offers a bevy of miraculous births and conceptions, think Leda and the Swan, but few detailed accounts of labor and delivery. Even Greek romance novels, which love a good telenovela-esque crisis, skip over the vagaries of childbirth. For instance, Heliodorus' Ethiopica, or Ethiopian story, hinges on the Ethiopian queen Persina's birth of a child with white skin as a result of maternal impression, the popular belief in antiquity and later that what a pregnant woman saw can impact a fetus. Yet it provides no description of her labor and delivery at all. Similarly, Christian literature reveals several instances of miraculous conceptions and births, both biblical and apocryphal, especially around the resolution of barrenness. In these cases, things like Abraham and Sarah's conception of Isaac in Genesis 21, right? And of course, Mary's conception, labor, and delivery of Jesus found expression in the popular works of the Proto-Evangelium of James and the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. But in these texts, Mary's lack of pain, fluids, and anxiety, standard features of childbirth, are the hallmarks of her birth experience. Additionally, other than the biblical perspective that birth be painful, prescriptive that birth be painful, originally found in Genesis 3:16, biblical models for labor and delivery are woefully absent. And as for references to stillborn children, they appear on multiple occasions in biblical literature, such as Job 3:16 and Ecclesiastes 6:3, but no detailed account of stillbirth accompanies their mention. They are used frequently metaphorically to bemoan fate. Right? Needless to say, descriptions of more realistic birthing experiences, including the danger of them, remain rare. In fact, I know of only 2 other accounts of difficult labor. The first occurs in the sayings of the Desert Fathers in the section concerning Macarius the Great, and the other occurs in the Historia Monachorum in Egypto in the section dedicated to John of Nicopolis. In the former, a local virgin lies about the father of her child and implicates Macarius as her impregnator. Her duplicity is discovered during childbirth when she's unable to push out the babe. When asked why she labors for days unsuccessfully, she cries, slide, I know what it is. It is because I slandered the anchorite and accused him unjustly. It is not he who is to blame, but such and such young man. The dangerous pregnancy resonates with early Christian concern over the perceived licentiousness of women, the role of slander and gossip in monastic communities, and the fear of monastic failure in the face of feminine wiles. In the other mention, a high-ranking officer's wife has a difficult labor while her husband is away visiting John of Nicopolis. The text describes her predicament as follows. New slide. She gave birth and losing consciousness hovered on the brink of death. And later, when John announces to the father the birth of a healthy son, John describes the woman's state as, in new slide, his mother, however, has come very near to losing her life. Here, the text emphasizes monastic foresight and perspicacity, but not John's ability to heal despite his knowledge of her distress. Interestingly, in both accounts, the women never receive names. They are only identified by their social roles, and the holy men do not intercede on behalf of the laboring women. In the sayings of the Desert Fathers account, that oversight seems narratively reasonable. After all, she had accused him of fathering her child. In the HMA, the Historia Monachorum in Egypto, it seems unnecessarily cruel. Conversely, the account in the life of Aaron not only emphasizes Aaron, or at least the mention of his God, as crucial to its resolution, but also offers a description of an actual obstetric problem. Recall, the text explains the woman cried out, saying, and there's slide, God of the holy Abbot Aaron, may you listen to me in this hour of need. And later, her parents inform Aaron and their daughter that their daughter invoked his name. Aaron, despite his absence, acts as a conduit to God and his curative powers. And, of course, she is in the throes of a child stuck in her uterus. In this sense, Aaron not only fulfills the function of both mediator and physician on behalf of the beleaguered woman, but he acts as the only viable option. She has no midwife who is with her. While the other holy men, John and Macarius, have no such role in the birth and delivery stories associated with them. It's a new style, stillbirth medical. More importantly, Aaron's intervention, new slide. Aaron's intervention, if I may call it that, resolves a serious medical crisis commonly understood as deadly. The text describes her predicament as her child got stuck inside her and died. Here it is important to note that bioarchaeological evidence and the historical record is very clear. Women and children died in childbirth, and infants could and did get stuck inside their mothers. For example, in 2018, and there should be a slide here, new slide. In 2018, a cemetery dated to the second millennia BCE in Aswan, Egypt, the exact area that serves as the setting for our text, revealed the remains of a woman with a child in her pelvis. What's more, not only do we have this evidence, but also ancient medical texts bear witness to an ongoing fear and anxiety over the possibility of a child becoming lodged in a woman's uterus, especially if this has died. Hippocrates, in his On the Nature of Women, composed sometime during the 4th and 5th centuries BCE, recommends violets and the fruit of purslane, also known as hogweed, suppositories made of blister beetle, and even cabbage to expel a dead fetus, just to name a few. Cyrannus, the 2nd century Greek physician who practiced primarily in Alexandria, explains in his work Gynecology, the new slide. Indeed, both menstruation and pregnancy are useful for the propagation of men, he quips. They're certainly not healthful for the child bearer. He goes on to explain the dangers of pregnancy and their curatives, including what one should do when a fetus becomes stuck in the uterus. And new slide. But if the embryo is dead, he writes, one must assist its complete expulsion by means of relaxing agents. The same text recommends forceful extraction, including embryotomy. And for those of you who don't know, embryotomy is the removal of the child from the uterus through surgical dismemberment for fetuses dislodged in the uterus. And finally, the 6th century Alexandrian trained physician, Aetius of Amida, continues this trend in the book 16 of his Tetrabiblios, which is dedicated to obstetrics and gynecology. He recommends rubs, baths, and fumigations to expel a fetus that has become lodged in the uterus. He also recommends embryotomy, stating, and if this is unsuccessful, dislodging the child, one must dismember the fetus. This must also, by all means, be done if the fetus should be too large or if it should be dead. He goes on to dedicate the entirety of a chapter to the proper execution of fetal dismemberment. An unborn child, then, in the eyes of ancient medical texts, unable to leave its mother's womb, was a serious crisis, and the medical literature treats it as such. In light of this context, life's insistence that invoking the name of Aaron, or rather the God of Aaron, saving the woman's life, makes for a rather wondrous and commonplace miracle, if we can estimate anything from the number of solutions that these medical texts offer for removal of a dead fetus. New slide. The liminality of the childbearing woman. By emphasizing the miraculousness of the healing, the text also highlights another aspect of the woman in the throes of childbirth. She is a liminal figure. It is worth mentioning that the birth of a child was fraught with anxiety over whether the husband or larger family would accept the child as a part of the household and legitimate offspring. A father's rejection could result in scorn or possible death for the mother and child. In the case of miscarriage and stillbirth, women were often assumed to have engaged in some sort of negligence or purposeful malfeasance, and they could be subject to shunning or worse. As a grieving mother Esther from the 6th century CE writes, and a new slide, I bear my children, they die. Perhaps I do something unfitting. Be so kind to send me a rule whereby I may walk, for my soul is grieved. Adding to the tenuous social position of these women was the real possibility of death. In the birthing bed, the woman had one foot with the living and another with the dead. The Historia Monacorum's account certainly advances this view with the description of the high-ranking officer's wife as on the brink of death and coming very near to losing her life. And it's certainly implied in these things of the dozen fathers that we read, that we saw earlier, when the fallen virgin is described as remaining in labor for many days without delivering the child. This sentiment also appears in Aetius when he discusses embryotomy with the explanation that it is necessary for the physician to examine the patient before undertaking the delivery to see if the woman will recover or not, whether she can be saved or given up lost. In all these texts, the woman in labor exists in a state of in-betweenness, alive but maybe shortly dead. Moreover, that liminality did not completely end at the birth or removal of a stillborn child. Slide. As Thavas, a woman in the 4th century, reminds us through her letter to her father, when you receive my letter, please come home at once because your poor daughter Herenia has died. Even though she had already come safely through a miscarriage on the 9th of Paofi, for she gave birth to an 8th-month child dead, and she lived on for 4 days. And after that she died and was given a funeral by us and her husband as was right, and has been transported to Labantius, the time of the birth. The perinatal period remained, in this sense, not only a socially tenuous place for women, but an actual tenuous place for women's lives. And this last type of liminality that our episode embraces, the idea that women stood when on birthing bed somewhere between an alive and dead state. The woman, of course, embraces this interpretation when she points out that if she had not entreated the God of the holy man Abba Aaron, she too would have sunk into death. We are left with the distinct impression that the woman has been chased by death itself and dodged it. So, conclusion. The striking account, new slide. The striking account of a woman's difficult labor and delivery of a stillborn boy in the Coptic life of Aaron offers more than a simple healing and animation. The details surrounding the curative of the woman and the vivification of the child challenges assumptions both about the responsibility of the woman in childbirth and the social standing of mothers after the birth of a newborn. In this story, the woman at least advocates for the importance of her own life, and God himself listens. And more importantly, the text names no blame at her feet for the death of the child. The narrative accepts his death as one of the possible outcomes of any pregnancy, and simultaneously puts forth the notion that women, while birthing, remain straddled between this life and the next. Turning back to the modern world, this last decade has seen an increase in popular articles bemoaning the state of maternal mortality rates, particularly in the United States. Fueled by a litany of scholarly studies and public policy papers, popular news forums and magazines alike have published such titles as, and there should be a new slide, and you'll have to click through it. So, why are American women dying in childbirth? Al Jazeera 2014. Click again. Maternal death rates are decreasing everywhere but the U.S. HuffPost 2017. And finally, the U.S. ranks worst in maternal care mortality compared with 10 other developed nations. The attention given to the issue by experts and lay people alike suggests that childbirth in the U.S. is unnecessarily, not inherently dangerous, an idea that would have been bizarre throughout most of history. True, the benefits of modern medicine have lessened the risks associated with childbirth, but ancients knew well what modern people, especially those who have the benefit of access to medical care, rarely acknowledge, that childbearing women linger between life and death, and that the birthing bed, a place of life, potentially becomes a grave in an instant. Thank you. And there should be the last slide.
Thank you.